Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Polyglot Nook. It's a real pleasure to be with you again. I want to take a moment and thank you for all the amazing comments you've been leaving. You are truly the heart of this show. Lately, many of you have been asking me about a particular person. A young woman named Mia. Now, I have to say, when I started looking into her, I was completely captivated. She's a fascinating figure, a real modern-day polyglot, with so many videos where she talks about her method. She recently passed 5 international language exams, reaching either a C1 or C2 level. That's a huge achievement. So, I spent a lot of time watching her videos, taking notes, and today, I'm going to share with you my interpretation of her journey and method. First, I'll give you a little background on her life. It's so interesting to see how she started. And then, we'll get to the most important part. Her method. How exactly did she do it? How did she achieve such amazing success in such a short time? So, let's start with a quick look at her life. Mia is from Turkey, and Turkish is her native language. What's remarkable is that no one in her family spoke a foreign language. And she didn't either, until she was in high school. For many of us, English is the first foreign language we encounter. But for Mia, her real passion was sparked by something a little different. She tells this great story about how someone once said to her, "Oh, you're learning English? Everyone learns English. It's so boring." Then they said, "I'm learning French, and it's so much more interesting." And just like that, a fire was lit inside her. She fell in love with the idea of learning French. It was this perfect combination of her new passion and her love for French music. She would listen to songs, try to understand the lyrics, and just immerse herself in the content. This is a fantastic example of a very informal way to begin learning a language, what we now call comprehensible input. She wasn't focused on grammar books or formal classes. She was just listening and trying to understand. But here's the thing. After about 3 years of this, she realized something. It wasn't the most efficient way. She was having fun, sure, but her progress wasn't what it could have been. It wasn't until she found her unique, structured method, which we'll talk about in a moment, that her French really took off. And once she had that method, she started adding other languages. I mean, get this. She passed 5 language exams at either C1 or C2 level. French, her first love, she passed at C2. Italian, also C2. The other 3, German, Spanish, and Russian, she passed at C1. You might be wondering about English. Well, for her, English was so natural, so self-evident, that she didn't even bother taking an exam. She speaks it freely and has a channel where she speaks English. So, if you count her native Turkish, plus the 5 languages she tested in, and English, that's 7 languages at a very high level. And she even says she speaks 9. The other 2, which she hasn't tested for, are still at a very good B1 or B2 level. She's only in her 20s, and she's a true language powerhouse. So, how did she do it? Well, the first thing to understand about Mia is that she's a true child of the internet age. She talks all the time about how she learned mostly online, using free resources. She didn't have to move abroad or find a ton of foreign friends. For most of her language journey, she was right there in Turkey. This is so important for us, my friends, because it shows that you don't need a lot of money or a passport to become a great language learner. It's the path many of us want to follow, to learn how to teach ourselves, to find the wealth of information that's available online, and to create a strict, effective method for using it. Mia has become her own brilliant teacher. In her videos, she also mentions a key characteristic of many other polyglots. She says that almost all of them learned their second, third, or fourth languages independently. While they might have used classes or tutors for their first language, they relied on self-study for the others. And here's another thing. When people hear about polyglots, they sometimes say, "Oh, a C1 or C2 certificate doesn't really prove anything. You could just study for the test and then forget everything a few months later." I want to challenge that idea. While it might be possible to trick a B1 or B2 exam to prepare so well for that specific test that you jump a level or two, it's impossible to do that for a C1 or C2. To pass a C1 exam, you must have a very solid B2 level. And a B2 level tells us one thing for sure: you have invested an incredible amount of time in learning and using that language. This isn't about being able to chat casually with a foreigner on the street. It's about having a proven, documented skill. And in my opinion, a certificate is a much stronger piece of evidence than a few video clips. So, with all that said, let's get into the heart of her method. I've broken it down into 3 phases, which correspond to a learner's progression: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. The first phase is all about the foundation. This is for someone who is just starting out and wants to build a strong base. She argues that this is the one phase where professional guidance can be most helpful. But she's not talking about just any teacher. For example, if you're a native English speaker and you want to learn German, it's best to find a teacher who is also an English speaker and learn German to a high level later in life. Why? Because they understand the specific struggles, the false friends, and the common pitfalls that are typical for someone with your native language. They can help you navigate around those language interferences that native German teachers might not even recognize. But as we said, her method is mostly about self-study. So, how do you find this guidance online? She warns against a common beginner's mistake: simply jumping from one random video to another. This is what she calls randomness. You might learn a word here, a phrase there, but there's no structure. It's like trying to build a house with random bricks you find on the street. Instead, she says, you need to find a structured, comprehensive course that's available online for free. For example, a solid series that guides you from the simple to the more complex in a logical way is something that random videos just can't do. Creative methods are great, and we'll get to them, but at the very beginning, a little structure is key. It's all about providing that structure we've been talking about, with professional audio and interactive exercises. The point is, just like Mia says, a good online course can be much more effective than a traditional textbook, especially one without audio. Textbooks can be static, online courses can be dynamic and interactive. That's why neither of us recommends relying solely on a basic textbook. Alright, on to the second phase, the intermediate level, around B1 to B2. This is where you encounter the infamous intermediate plateau. You feel like you're not making any more progress. The reason for this is that you can't break through this plateau by only using course materials. You need to attack it from 2 sides. First, you must continue with some systematic learning to master the grammar and context. Second, you must consume a huge amount of comprehensible content. This is where her method really shines. Unlike the beginner phase where you learn words from a lesson, here you must start learning words from context. She is a strong opponent of learning isolated words from lists. Words without context are meaningless and are easily forgotten. A word you find in a podcast you just listened to, or in a sentence you just wrote, is much easier to remember. So what does she do? She doesn't keep a vocabulary notebook, she keeps a phrase notebook. She never writes down single words, but always the whole phrase. Of course, she highlights the new word and its meaning, but it's never alone. It's always in the context of a sentence, preferably the one where she first encountered it. This is a great practical tip for you: start a phrase notebook today. Mia uses a physical notebook, but you can do it digitally. I, for example, use a program called Anki, and my flashcards always contain full phrases, with audio and even a grammatical breakdown from an AI. The point is, whether it's a physical notebook or an app, a phrase is always better than a single word. The second, and maybe most important, part of this phase is the constant, never-ending flow of content. To make this truly effective, she follows some specific rules. First, she looks for content that is at the right level for her. The best comprehensible input is when you understand about 95% of the words. This allows you to guess the meaning of new words from the context. Second, the key isn't to watch or listen to something just once. She says you should re-watch or re-listen to the same piece of content up to 5 times. If you really love it, even more. And you must interact with the material actively. This isn't passive listening. You should translate new words, write down phrases you like, and try to retell the story in your own words, either written or spoken. This active engagement is what moves vocabulary from your passive knowledge, the words you understand, to your active knowledge, the words you can actually use. So, here's a practical tip for you: create a separate YouTube profile just for your target language. You can do this easily within your existing Google account. In this new profile, you only subscribe to channels in the language you're learning. That way, your recommendations are filled with content in that language, and you're constantly immersed. And then, you can use Mia's cycle: watch, rewatch, write down phrases, and then try to retell the story into your phone's voice recorder. It's a fantastic way to track your progress and stay motivated. Let's imagine you've broken through the intermediate plateau. Now, you're facing another huge challenge: the C level. While B2 means you're fluent in everyday situations, C1 and C2 mean you're fluent in specific, complex, and specialized contexts, like academic or professional environments. It's the level of a highly educated native speaker. At this point, the core of the method stays the same, but you use more advanced materials. And you start to act more like a native speaker. For example, if you need to give a speech on a complex topic, you simply research that topic, just as a native speaker would. The preparation process isn't that different. Or, if you've noticed a specific pronunciation issue, you can go to a specialist, a phonetician, or a good teacher to fix it. This is exactly what a native speaker would do if they wanted to improve their pronunciation. It's about being proactive and precise in your learning. One other cool tip for the advanced level is something Mia and I both use. If you have some very specific text you need to memorize or learn well, you can record yourself reading it with good intonation and pronunciation. Then you can listen to your own mini podcast. Not only is it a great way to memorize, but it's also excellent practice. To wrap things up, let's talk about a few key ideas that run through all of Mia's advice. First, a question people often ask is, how do you start thinking in a foreign language? The answer is simple but not easy. The only way is through years of active immersion. Your native language comes naturally because you've spent a huge amount of time using it. You have to do the same with a foreign language. There's no quick fix. Second, her method is all about online self-study as the main method, not just a supplement. It's the core of her learning. And finally, you have to be patient and realistic. Even with all her rapid success, Mia never forgets that it took her 4 years of active study to reach a high level in her first foreign language, French. So, to sum up, Mia's journey shows us that with the right method, patience, and dedication, anyone can master multiple languages even without expensive classes or living abroad. Her story is a true inspiration for all language learners who want to become their own teachers and take full advantage of the wealth of free online resources. Thank you so much for listening and spending time with us here at Polyglot Nook. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more language tips and stories, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to us and helps keep this community growing. I'm sending hugs to all of you. Take care, and I'll talk to you very soon.